Cool. Thank you. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Good evening. My name is Nadia. Welcome to the War on Youth webinar meeting. It's our first webinar of the year, too, with Stop LAPD Spying, or at least the Gregorian New Year, right? The calendar. But yeah, hopefully folks are doing well. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you're comfortable sharing your name, your gender pronoun, maybe what brought you here today. Yeah, so again, my name is Nadia. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition. So today, hey Chella, what's up? So today what we're going to be, before I kind of go into a little bit of background, just to let folks know, we do have the chat open. You're not able to unmute yourself, but of course we like these to be interactive. So if at any point you'd like to, you can put the raise hand and we're happy to unmute you. Just for the Zoom bombing sake, but yeah, really, that's pretty much it. And in terms of like what we're going to be looking at, I'm just going to give a super quick background on what we mean by the war on youth. I know some of you are familiar, but for folks who aren't, just to kind of share that with you. And also today we will be hearing from a couple different folks. We'll be starting off with an activity too, and then we'll be hearing from Mariela, who is one of the members of Stop LAPD Spying, who will actually be talking about an important case about a youth and just really what he went through, what he's been through, and just how what community power looks like, and how we stand up for young people as well. So and after that, we'll also be looking at, we'll be speaking with there I see Mariela, I saw you turn your video on. Hey. And then we'll also be talking with Tiff and Amira about the Community Safety Partnership and the impact of that on the war on youth and how those impact each other, right? And yeah, so happy folks can join us. And again, feel free throughout to put any questions in the chat, any comments. You can unmute your, ask to be unmuted as well. And so yeah, so just a super quick kind of overview on what we mean by the war on youth. We know that young people have historically been targeted, young people who are otherized, Black youth, Indigenous youth, immigrant youth, Muslim youth, trans youth. And so through different narratives, right? And one narrative we know over the last few decades has been the gang narrative, how that has been used to target, to criminalize young people. And really what we've seen now, the last 10 plus years and even longer, but really kind of pick up a lot more, is using the terrorism and the violent extremism narrative to target young people. Again, it's not replacing the gang narrative, but it's sort of building with it. And of course, it's its own way of targeting young people. And within that, we've seen one of the couple programs, right, primarily headed by the Department of Homeland Security, under this umbrella of anti-violent extremism policies, programs, right? One known as Countering Violent Extremism. And within that is Preventing Violent Extremism in Schools, which specifically targets young people and really targeting them under this guise of naming behaviors as suspicious, that young people are on this pathway to radicalization, right? And some of those indicators that the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security say are things such as expressing anger, questioning authority, being too much into your culture, right? Being in poverty, being a migrant. These are all what the state claims are indicators that a young person could be on this pathway to becoming a, quote, terrorist, violent extremist. Sort of LA's local version of that is TVTP, the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention, and PATH. And thank you, Akil, for putting all the alphabet soup in there. And PATH is Providing Alternatives to Hinder Extremism. And essentially, under these programs, LAPD has gotten grants to create a team of basically snitches, of informants, which consists of, teachers, faith leaders, counselors, people who youth, are supposed to trust, right? Or at least we know, of course, we know the sort of bigger thing, we know the role of education in policing youth as well, right? But sort of these roles are meant to work with youth. And what's particularly kind of frightening about these programs is they claim to be getting away supposedly from policing, which is not possible if it's being headed by the DHS, right? But essentially what these programs are doing is getting community members to snitch on each other, right? So that you're not necessarily seeing the police there, but how the community then does the policing as well. So that's just a kind of a very quick rundown of the programs that we're fighting against, that we're building power against. And feel free, if anyone has any questions about that, to put that in the chat. And again, when we talk to folks, we are going to be kind of building kind of the connections as well. So I will pause there and see, does anybody have any question they would like to ask or put in the chat for right now? And if not, that's good too. All right, I will pause there. Again, feel free to ask any questions. And before we talk to the folks who are here, before we talk with Mariela and then Tiff and Amira, Matios and Maraki are going to guide us in an activity. So I'll pass it over to y'all. Or Akil first. Sorry, my bad.
No, that was right.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. And thanks so much, everybody. This is Matios speaking. I use he, him pronouns, a community organizer with the coalition. And I'm going to be doing this little exercise with the homie Maraki. Maraki, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Hey, y'all. I'm Maraki or Maraki. I use they, she pronouns, and I'm also with the coalition and also an organizer at Baji, which is Black Alliance for Just Immigration. I'm really happy to be in space with y'all. I'll pass it back to Matios for now.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess before we delve into this, we're going to be covering just throughout this different aspects of the fight, or like of all our fights, or maybe intersections. And I know, there are a lot of folks here from organizations or maybe educators or whatever. And if there's an aspect or facet that sticks out to you, you can drop it in the chat and make a comment or raise your hand at any point. I can also put down our email in the chat, which is just stop.lapdspying@gmail.com. And you can shoot us an email about any of this. So this first exercise, the theme for this kind of first community meeting of the year is the fight ahead. And so I think those of us in organizing spaces and those of us not even in organizing spaces are kind of hip to the fact that, LA is kind of shaken up a little bit, at least in appearance, as to who's gotten elected. There's a new mayor, city council looks different, a bunch of new state legislation passed through, where the chief's trying to get a new term. And so with that clear landscape shift, we know that usually that means there are I shouldn't say brand new, rebranded opportunities for criminalization or youth targeting, or maybe even different areas where our attention should be. And so this next exercise is kind of to immerse us in the upcoming year and the upcoming fight, and also just an opportunity for folks to share their observations from different aspects of the fight. So we've got Akil made this beautiful graph. I'm going to call it a graph of concentric circles that encompass different aspects of the state's jurisdiction and also our targets, right? The things we organize against. So we've got LA, SoCal, like the county and the city, California, national and international. And so what we want folks to do is just to very, just very leisurely talk about any programs. They don't even need to necessarily be programs related to youth, just anything that's on the horizon or that has happened recently that we can expect to be used to target our youth, or maybe an aspect of a program that's a lot broader that we hadn't considered would make our youth vulnerable. Akil's dropping in the chat that does everyone have the ability to unmute? I believe we do. If anyone wants to try it, that'd be cool. But if you can't, drop it in the chat and we can do that for you. But yeah, so just an example of some of these. So on the LA level, you know, we work against some of those programs that Nadia had talked about. One of them is PATH, and that's a clear example of you know, a local program that we're organizing against. But can folks think of anything that's coming up or that has happened fairly recently on the local level for us? That's LA, SoCal, if you're from here, that we should be looking out for. And it can be broad. So I'm going to provide another example just to show how kind of broad it can be. Another thing, you know, we're housed in LA Los Angeles Community Action Network, fighting for housing justice. And, you know, on behalf of the folks in, like alongside, led by the people in Skid Row, right? And we've been fighting against 4118, which for folks that don't know is a sit, lie, sleep ban in LA that criminalizes the homeless. You know, and the way it does this is by the addition of these metrics where people can't sit or sleep according or within proximity of certain landmarks, right? So it's like, I'm making these numbers up, but 10 feet from a fire hydrant, 2 feet from a driveway, 1,000 feet from a homeless shelter. That's the way it's kind of enforced. And a new addition that kind of rolled out, or a new amendment to this 4118 law, was 500 feet within any school, right? So terrible, right? Clearly it criminalizes unhoused people around schools. And the way the city kind of rolled this out is by using landlords and people from the school district to come out and say, oh, we're being terrorized, we need these protections, this, that, and the third. But in the course of this meeting, and I think Akil was there too, we also witnessed unhoused parents and their children that say, hey, we're unhoused, you know, we're sleeping in our car, or, you know, we've got a tent that's within 500 feet of, you know, my kid's school. And so this poses an entry point for a criminalization, for incarceration for that parent, like citations, right? Like financial violence. And so on its face, not necessarily targeting youth, but obviously targets youth. So that's just another example of another thing we can kind of think about. But yeah, don't be shy.
Can I invite one of our friends from Baji or PYM or Anakbayan? I see Anakbayan in the house. To talk a little bit about what their organization is working on in the upcoming year, either on a local level or national or international.
I'm happy to share. You're going to hear from me in a bit, so that's why I was leaving space for our PYM comrades to share. But yeah, at Baji in the local level, some of the things that we're going to be continuing to work. Okay, shouts out, Angela. I'll point to you in a sec. Some of the local things that we'll be working on is continuing to sort of fight for a Los Angeles Justice Fund that is more inclusive, although the program has already been passed and will continue to include criminal exclusions. We will be working within the coalition, the LAJF coalition, we call ourselves, to just allow it to really work towards universal representation, I guess. And this can probably also be expanded at the, state and national level, but particularly in Los Angeles, universal representation is something that we've been working on. And for those who don't know, I'll just very briefly share that the LA Justice Fund is a city-funded, also county-funded program that allows for free legal representation and wraparound services for immigrants, particularly those who are at risk of deportation. At the moment, in the city level, it includes criminal carve-outs that disproportionately affects Black migrants. At the county level, there are no criminal carve-outs, but the city has not agreed to do the same, which is unsurprising for those who know LA City Council. So that's one thing, and I'll pass it to Angela to speak more on their organization.
Thank you so much. So yeah, one of the things that we're currently still working on, or one of our campaigns, is the Justice for the Roques campaign. And yeah, maybe some of you know about it, but they were a Filipino migrant family that was that experienced a hate crime, a white supremacist hate crime, and basically they've been like fighting for justice, even though the police, the LAPD haven't helped them through the process. So the community has really been the ones trying to get justice. And also the Philippine consulate hasn't provided help. Instead, they've pretty much organized like surveillance of the family, since they know that organizations like Anak Bayan and Gabriela are supporting the family. So during one of the meetings with the consulate, there was actually a Philippine National Police present. And so yeah, the family's kind of really like dealing with surveillance while they're trying to get justice. And there's a couple hearings coming up that we're asking like the community to come and support. So one is tomorrow morning at the Van Nuys courthouse. So it's probably like too late notice, but there's also another one on the 24th. And yeah, I can try to send out more information about that, but that's one. And then I guess another like that we've just been dealing with like pretty constantly is kind of like just like general surveillance. Back in November, there was actually a counterinsurgency tour that was sponsored by the Philippine state, and it was organized by SMNI News Network, which is it's a reactionary news network that is run by a known sex trafficker who is wanted in the United States. But anyways, they basically came to different cities in the United States their goal is to basically get like reactionary citizens to be a force multiplier for the Philippine National Police and military in surveilling our organizations. So yeah, they actually have like a headquarter here in LA. So that's just something that we're like kind of trying to expose. And then recently, Anak Bayan National in the Philippines, their page was shut down by Facebook, and that's kind of significant because Facebook is still the most used social network in the Philippines, and also admins of the page like had received notifications that their accounts had been hacked into. So yeah, I think we're still really interested in conducting a public records request, trying to see what's going on with the Philippine consulate, and we're still not too sure like who they're connected with and what information they have. So yeah, I think that's something that we would want to explore in the new year. But yeah, thank you.
Wow. Yeah, thank you, Angela, for sharing that. And you know, that covers so many intersections, right? Just because locally, you know, especially, you know, the case of the Roquez family, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. You know, that's they experienced, you know, a hate crime or white supremacist violence here locally. And I think, you know, without the advocacy of groups like Anak Bayan and Gabriela, we would have seen further inaction by the police department and the district attorney and all that. And then the inclusion of national police when like of Philippine national police to target and surveil y'all while you're trying to do that work on a like local advocacy just goes to show how you're targeted on an international level, right? For something you're doing locally. And we've talked about this to some extent with Angela. Maybe Angela, you want to say more about it, but groups like Anak Bayan and Gabriela, who you know also advocate for Black life here locally, are and you know for the Philippine liberation as well. They are targeted back home, and we know that groups like the LAPD are also keen on targeting protesters, right, or anyone that kind of runs contrary to the white supremacist norm. And they do this through shadow teams, which are parts of the LAPD units within the LAPD that are both uniformed and undercover. And we saw this come into play after the George Floyd uprising in a bigger way, although it's been done forever and ever. And it's a full court press. They actually brought it up again this past November and mentioned that, you know, they have new training guides for these shadow teams. And so it would be unsurprising to find out that these teams are working together, but that's an aspect of a fight that may appear local first, but has international ramifications for our comrades at Anak Bayan. And yeah.
I can talk a little bit about what PYM is doing locally, and then maybe Fatima or Abdullah can talk about what we're doing nationally. Yeah, so as far as PYM goes, right now locally we have a few different sectors of work. So one sector of work is our confronting Zionism sector. So we're trying to establish within our locale a strategy and campaign for confronting Zionism locally. And a lot of the we have several pieces of work that fall within that. Part of it is the work we're doing with you all, of course, on, you know, countering CVE, countering you know, the presence of law enforcement in our communities, targeting our youth and things like that. One thing that we're working on within that as well is the work around the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. So that's IHRA, IHRA stands for the International Holocaust Remembrance Association, I believe. And they have the definition of anti-Semitism that equates anti-Semitism with equates anti-Zionism with anti-Semitism. So any critique of the state of Israel is considered anti-Semitic, and they have been pushing to have that adopted by governmental bodies that have the power to enforce that as like hate crime. So that was recently adopted by the city council in I believe, I don't remember if it was West Hollywood or East Hollywood or North Hollywood, but one of the city councils in Hollywood adopted that in their school boards, and we were doing some mobilization around that. And so now we're kind of looking for, you know, now that that's been adopted, what's the next step in you know, challenging that adoption, or, you know, and continuing to confront efforts to adopt that. Something else we're doing is we're working with or we're working on revitalizing the fight for ethnic studies and defending Arab American studies as part of that. So in California, there's a big fight for ethnic studies to be implemented and to be taught in high schools. And as part of that work on the state level, there was a curriculum that was created that included Arab American studies. But with after heavy Zionist backlash, both against the Arab American studies and against the project of ethnic studies as a whole, the committee that proposed that was scrapped, and they revised the curriculum to instead, be like really watered down. It moved Arab American studies to the appendix as like an optional subject matter. It used like a lot of really kind of like more liberal language, replacing like analyses of like power and white supremacy with kind of like and like all lives matter sort of framework. So there's currently fights against that, and we're trying to revitalize what that looks like in LA, and locally in LA, Orange County, Inland Empire. And then let's see, so that's the confronting Zionism work that we have going on. I talked about IRA, I talked about ethnic studies, and then there was, I feel like, one more sector within confronting Zionism that I'm missing. Abdullah, Fatima, do y'all remember? Or
No, that's great. Yeah, that's comprehensive.
cool.
I will say, just like on the IRA work, we are putting together a webinar that is we'll send out the date soon enough, but that's going to discuss issues surrounding the definition, where it has passed in locales, where it has failed, and strategies around that, and the implications for organizing more broadly beyond just Palestine, in fact. So yeah, and yeah, thank you, Yahya.
For sure.
Yeah, thanks y'all so much. I think this is a lot, and I think this really paints a picture of how much a lot of our work here in Los Angeles and in Southern California as a whole really intersects, right? We're seeing just a lot of commonalities in our fights and in our efforts, and I think that it's sometimes can be a bit despairing, if that's a word, but other times it's empowering because we're able to see how our fights not only is our oppression connected, but our fights are connected. And I think that's really dope because we're doing an incredible job at sort of uplifting each other's work and supporting one another. So I want to sort of expand just a little bit from Los Angeles to California, right? Talking a bit more about the fights that are ahead at the state level. And so some of that has kind of already been touched, right? We've talked a bit about, sorry, I'm trying to zoom in properly. We've talked a bit about universal representation at the state level. We've talked a bit about curriculum, right? That's been removed, and talking about ethnic studies, right? And so another thing that comes to mind at the state level, an issue that we've been currently more recently been having to deal with the ramifications of is an amendment to the Brown Act, which essentially allowed legislative bodies in the state of California to enforce the removal of so-called disruptive individuals from meetings, right, from public meetings. And for those of us who have had instances of being in public spaces and being disruptive, right, using our First Amendment right to free speech, to go to council meetings, to go to board meetings, commission meetings, what have you, that is now being, targeted, right? And you as an individual, you as a constituent, are no longer able to take that right of yours to be able to go to a meeting and, protest essentially. without the threat of being removed. And then if you resist in any sort of way, a lot of these bodies have the power now to use state violence to remove you from that space. So this is something that we've been fighting a lot. This is something that requires a lot of surveillance in order to have happen. I know Matiox can even speak on the fact that, not that you have to, but he's experienced, as I've experienced, our recent fights in City Council, Los Angeles City Council, where we're actively being surveilled and actively having the Brown Act being used on us, this amendment to the Brown Act being used on us to prevent us from speaking our voices. So that's one example here. I'm wondering if other folks have any similar instances or just have a similar fight that they're having to deal with in California. Matius, if you want to speak on that too, you can absolutely speak on, how some of us don't have those rights. Please share.
Yeah, Akil, I know you want to talk about path a little bit, but just even thinking about how, so the Brown Act, for folks that don't know, it's a set of rules here in California that governs any incorporated body. Like it's a blanket set of rules for like HOA boards, neighborhood councils, city councils, just any incorporated governing body of any sort. And we kind of saw this rise in the policing of public comment after, well, at least an increase of it. It's always existed, right? Like as to who can make public comment and whatnot. But we really saw a kickoff after the George Floyd uprisings in 2020. And the way we understand it, it's political repression for sure, but it's also a means by which these different entities, whether it's the Board of Police Commissioners here in LA or City Council, can kind of craft a narrative, right? We are at the Board of Police Commissioners every week and at City Council typically every week. And I can think of a fight, a couple of years past where the Board of Police Commissioners was trying to, we were trying to get a facial recognition technology ban underway, and public comment was overwhelmingly opposed to facial recognition technology of any sort. Like they said, we don't want it at all. But of course, the police commission didn't implement a ban in any way, and in fact they didn't listen to folks because that's their will. Like, so they have this means of I guess this semblance or facade of like public input, but they don't even listen to it. Or when we were fighting targeted violence and terrorism prevention, the TVTP grant that folks have been talking about for the PATH program here in LAPD, we did so in the Public Safety Committee in City Council, and all but one public comment that day was opposed to TVTP, and yet they still passed it, right? And so, when folks aren't heard and when folks aren't given an avenue to be heard, at City Council, we saw Nuri Martinez would actually curate, and the Board of Police Commissioners does this too, curate who gets to speak, right? So no matter when you queue up, they're going to pick who gets to speak to give this semblance of a binary in opinions, right? Even though people overwhelmingly don't want it. And so, when that tactic doesn't work, we shut shit down. And so this is really them codifying a means by which they can repress people further, silence dissenting voices. It's in line with this IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, where it's criminalizing, political dissent. In that case, it's fighting against Zionism. In this case, it's fighting against racism of any sort. And so this expansion in the Brown Act is, or this amendment to the Brown Act is going to make it easier for folks to do that. So Meraki and I have been consistently at City Council, and the city attorney Fogel and the president Krikorian will routinely call out Meraki by name in front of everybody to target them as a disruptor, and so that's just an extension of that. Yeah. Yeah. And then, Wes, do you want to talk about that? You're good. Just leave it in the chat.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. I
No,
just want
no.
to leave that in the chat. Thank you.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it just to that point, and I'll shut up because I've been talking a lot, but juxtaposing this, this notion of suspending in-person meetings in the name of COVID, right? That's when that was done. But we look at the fact that COVID restrictions and COVID protections are being removed in other ways, right? So when it comes to tenant protections, COVID's not a priority, but when it comes to silencing protesters, suddenly COVID's of interest. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for sharing that. Akhil, I know you wanted to talk a bit about PATH. Please feel free.
Hey, yeah, thank you. Just as a reminder, PATH stands for Providing Alternatives to Hinder Extremism, and it's the kind of flagship LAPD anti-extremism program that's like within their, I mean, there are other programs that are, like for a region or for an area the LAPD might be involved with, but PATH is one that they've created, and they actually, so last year, one of the big parts of our fight was fighting them getting a grant that they would be using to create this 500-person team of informants. Unfortunately, as Matthias was saying, they accepted that grant. And they've already started training the informants, and we also know that PATH has existed before. This is expanding PATH, so I just wanted to let people know about some things to expect in our fight, and also to join if you want to be involved with. But we're continuing to do research. We already have uncovered training documents from the PATH training, and it's really interesting to see how they're being trained. It also lists specific names of people within the police department who received the training, as well as LA County Department of Mental Health officials who are engaged in the training. We're still trying to uncover which teachers or LAUSD administrators were involved, because we want to be, there with youth, letting them know who's potentially in their classrooms or in their schools who have been trained by the LAPD to surveil them. But one important thing that we're looking forward to this year is there is a part of our records request to LAPD that they've flat out rejected. They have not even actually provided a lot of legal justification for rejecting it. And that is the part of our request where we're specifically asking who has been targeted. We want to find out who has been targeted by PATH. We want to know so that we can potentially even reach out to them and start organizing them in a similar way to what the coalition has been doing, for example, with the people who are targeted by another program the LAPD had called Operation Laser. So as we enter this year in the fight ahead, one thing that we're going to be doing, oh shoot, can you all still hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Okay, cool. One thing we're looking into is the possibility of a lawsuit to potentially sue for these records of people who've been targeted by PATH. The other thing we're going to be doing is we're going to be trying to create popular education to popularize understanding of how PATH works, who has been trained by PATH. These are some things we already are finding out without the lawsuit. So just kind of letting people know that this is some of the direction that we're going. We also want to get into schools as much as possible, let youth know about this program, and also work with people who are, like school counselors, therapists, mental health practitioners. So if you're interested in getting involved in this fight, to fight against the creation of these teams of therapists and teachers and administrators who are going to be surveilling youth for the idea that they're extremists. We have our regular, Abudi, I see your hand.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can continue. I can ask after.
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, we have our regular meeting on, hold on 1 second. Somebody's at the door.
I can complete that
Oh,
thought.
yeah. I'm sorry. I got to go answer the door. I'm really sorry. Give me 1
No
second.
worries. Yeah. Our regular working meeting is on the third Wednesday of every month at 6 p.m. And then we have a regular research session it's the third Wednesday at 6 p.m. I don't know if I said that, in case I didn't. And then our regular research sessions where we go over these public records requests. Oh, good point, Nadia. And that might be changing real soon, so stay posted. But our research sessions aren't where we go over these public records requests that Akil was talking about. And those are the first and third Thursday at 5 p.m. No, thank you for that, Nadia. Yeah, but we may be changing our work meeting times because we're working with some great youth then. Abu, were you trying to say something? Happened there?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, I mean, that sounds amazing about the coming work. Do you anticipate, when you talk about potentially organizing people who have been targeted by PATH, do you anticipate maybe even, you know, like organizing people who have been incarcerated or are targeted for it, or in legal disputes, anything like that?
I mean, yeah, I think all of that is a possibility right now. Akil compared it to our work with the chronic offenders bulletin list. And so maybe I can talk about that a little bit, and that might be kind of the model for what we do with this. So, you know, the coalition came together and organized folks to dismantle the first generation of policing, and those are 2 programs. One of those programs is called LASER, which stands for Los Angeles Strategic Extraction and Restoration. And it was a location and person-based predictive policing program. So they would target different neighborhoods and you know, just inundate it with cops. And that was the location-based component. They called them laser zones. We call them laser kill zones because people always ended up dead. And the person-based aspect of it was where they would designate 2 gang cops, right, to target individuals. And these individuals were compiled on a list. There was a secret list. The LAPD wouldn't even admit to it. It's called the Chronic Offender Bulletin list. And it's people within a community who had been given points based on police interactions, prior arrests, just this nonsense, right? And so the LAPD would go out every day and just look for these people and try to catch them a charge, or in at least one instance, like actually kill them, right? And so when we got a hold of this list through a lawsuit, what we did is we reached out to the folks on it. We asked, and we're still working on this, we're still talking to these people, but we asked what their experiences have been. And of course, they didn't know why, but they had constantly been harassed. They had been targeted. So, you know, it offered some vindication and assurance and affirmation of their experiences. But yeah, the other aspect is, I think just we're still working on it, but we're trying to figure out what more we can do for folks. Yeah, after we've shared this information with them. So all of that is possible.
Yeah, thanks so much, y'all. Really appreciating this discourse and folks' ideas. I do see we're at the 6:49 mark, and I know we wanted to get to the what is it, national and international levels. So if folks want to add to the chat what other statewide things they've got going on before we move on. But yeah, I think we're gonna go ahead and move now to the national level fights that we have ahead of us this year. So back to you, Matios.
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, can folks think about any changes on the national level? Anything we should look out for? I mean, to me, like we've been talking a lot about the anti-trans legislation that's rolling out, that's targeting youth across the country. So I don't know if folks have any other examples. We can't exactly add them to the list, but maybe we can hear about a couple if anyone feels inclined to share. Yeah, Chelo, did you want to speak on that? Oh, okay, sorry. Yeah.
I should if I'm with my baby, so I've been sitting in and out, and I'm hearing like national stuff impacting young people. Is that right?
Marielle, I'm so sorry. I lost the, I didn't hear the last.
Were you asking about national stuff impacting or impacting young folks? Is that the question?
Yeah, you're still a little bit muffled. That baby's clear as day though, which I'm really happy about.
Yo, Ali.
We were,
Okay, let me come right back. I think my phone's.
okay,
I'll come right back.
okay.
Matu, should I open up the shared screen again? Are we on that activity still?
Yeah, we were just talking about the national bit.
Oh, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Were there things that I should add to it based on what people said? I'm sorry, you all.
We just talked about anti-trans legislation across the country. But it's actually a good segue or yeah, Marathi, I don't know if you feel inclined, or we can take it to Mariella to talk about, and the criminalization of drag shows. Yeah. I feel like, I'm trying to think of more concrete examples.
No, yeah, I feel like one sort of connection between, oh, yeah, Mariela, I see you put it in the chat. You want to comment on anti-trans bills in most states. Okay, yeah. I don't know if you're in a space to speak on that, or if you want to give it some time. Okay, I think maybe I'll speak more on that later. Yeah, William West, thank you. Parents at school boards were targeted by DHS. Yeah. Do you want to speak a bit more on that?
Yes, especially because in the context of like the LGBT curriculum, like debate that's happening at the school boards, I think that's part of why there's like a lot of parents coming in and like engaging in the political process at that level. But I'm thinking more specifically about the medical freedom anti-mandate parents at school boards, because that was another thing that brought out a lot of parents to engage with their school boards. So it's interesting because I don't agree with like one side, but you know what I'm saying, with the anti-trans LGBT stuff, like that's tied into that. So I feel like I need to speak to that as someone who's like, loves that community.
Yeah, right. No, thank you so much for sharing that. And Angela, I see you're also sharing that the Supreme Court is hearing a case that could allow companies to sue their workers for the cost of a strike. That's absolutely relevant. Do you want to speak on that a little bit?
Sure. I'm not really sure too much about it. I need to research more, but it was just something that I saw where I guess there's a company that's doing one union for the cost of like the cement cement workers went on strike and they left cement in the trucks to like dry, and the company is suing them for like the cost of the damaged trucks, and this case could like set a precedent where like the companies could potentially sue workers who go on strike for like cost of like spoiled food and lost revenue and things like that. So it's just something to be aware of, I think.
Yeah, wow. I didn't even know about that. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah. Okay, I do see that we're kind of over time, so I want to speed us up just a little bit. Talking a bit more at the international level. And something that actually kind of connects between national and international fights is this sort of ongoing fight to stop and prevent law enforcement from using facial recognition and other biometric surveillance on our communities. Actually, this also kind of ties in at the state level, because in California, last year there was a Senate bill that people were working on, a lot of coalitions and organizations were working on to prevent law enforcement from using facial recognition and other forms of biometric surveillance, which, as we know, is very much so harmful to all of the marginalized communities you can imagine, right? We're talking immigrant communities, we're talking sex workers, we're talking youth, right? Black and brown communities are all terribly affected by the use and info sharing that happens when facial recognition, biometric surveillance is being used. So I feel like that's is sort of deeply interconnected fight. I know it's pretty vague and broad, but like it's an ongoing fight at like all levels that we're working at. So yeah, if anybody wants to briefly share some international fights that are going on as a Black immigrant serving organization. I know we have quite a few, but I want to also offer the opportunity for a lot of migrant-based organizations that we have in this space with us, right? We've got PYM, we've got Anukbayan. So I want to see if you guys have anything that you want to share in the chat or off mute. So I can also share that for Baji, one of the biggest fights we have right now is against Title 42, right? It's something that is ever evasive. We keep trying to end it, and it keeps sticking around, whether due to conservative legislators and elected officials or Biden himself. And so Title 42 is an ongoing fight. It's a public health order, for those who don't know, that has, it's a false public health order and really just serves the purpose of targeting and deporting migrants who come to the border seeking asylum, predominantly Black migrants and Haitian migrants out of that community. So just wanting to uplift Title 42 as a public health order that uses surveillance in a lot of ways to collect biometric data and target community members, right? It collects how often you've sought asylum. It collects, what country you come from, what your family's information is, what country they were born in, how people identify, and all of this information gets stored in US databases and can be used against asylum seekers. So yeah, just wanting to note that because Title 42 also holds immigrants at the border, which means that they have to seek asylum from Mexico or any other country that they're seeking asylum from, and that means that they are exporting. The U.S. is exporting their immigration policies and laws to other countries, and they're having to hold migrants until the U.S. deems them acceptable to be either welcomed into the U.S. in some way, shape, or form, or being deported back to another country, right? So it's just another example of how the U.S. exports racism, anti-Blackness, and harmful immigration policies. Yeah, so okay, we're at 7 o'clock. So if folks want to share how their orgs are doing things internationally in the chat, that's really cool. But otherwise, I really want to offer Mariela a chance to really talk more about, what they are ready to share with us. So Mariela.
We might have lost Mariella for a second. Let's see if we can get them back. Until then, yeah. Do folks have any questions about anything we've talked about so far? Or is there something you'd like to hear us talk about? Yeah, I encourage folks to chime in. And here's Mariella. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, if anything pops up, feel free to drop it in the chat, or raise your hand or unmute. Oh, we got something from Angela here. Just wanted to add that Biden recently granted the Marcos administration 100 million in military aid, which we know will go toward red tagging murdering activists in the Philippines, as well as surveillance of organizations here in other countries. Yeah, that's awful.
I have another one to add. It's related to what I'll be sharing about. But in El Salvador, there's just an increased police state and targeting supposed gang or gang affiliated or not gang or former gang or families of gangs. That's their idea supposedly. And it's targeting folks and incarcerating them. They haven't seen any, not that there's justice necessarily through courts, but they haven't been through any kind of trials or anything like that. But they also, within that, some of the extreme laws coming from them is they made it so that they could incarcerate folks as young as 12 years old. And yeah, there's a whole long list of abuses, all kinds of violence happening from the state in El Salvador. And they're in conversations with Honduras, Guatemala, and Mexico to implement similar police state, which is also in touch. They're also in conversations with Israel around those tactics, and with Japan and China, they're in conversations, or we're collaborating with them around the development of one of the largest prisons in the world in one of the smallest countries in the world too.
That's really disgusting, especially to hear, they're incarcerating kids as young as 12. Literal children. Thank you for sharing that, Mario. And so, yeah, I mean, if folks have any more, please feel free to drop it into the chat. But Mariella, I actually wanted to pass it along to you now, to share some of the victories you've led recently. So I'm gonna just give it to you.
Great, thank you. First, just thank you all for this space. I'm appreciating all of you and this conversation and everywhere each of you fight from and love from. I see that heart, Nadia. It's a lot of powerful heart work everybody's doing. And Mateos named it. I think I could start from there. We had a great win most recently for a young person named Pedro Echeverria. He is someone in my neighborhood of Lincoln Heights, El Sereno. We live in between those two neighborhoods. It's like this small pocket some folks call Rose Hills, but anyways, just this little neighborhood I grew up in. And just to give some background on some story on Pedro, we met back in 2017. Can you all hear me too? I was wondering if the sound got fixed.
Yeah, it sounds great, Mario.
Okay, sweet. We met back in 2017 in March. At that time, my younger brother was incarcerated with a life sentence. And my brother is gang affiliated with 18th Street. 18th Street has different pockets in different places in LA and different parts of the world. And there's a small pocket, I don't think pocket's the right word, but there's a small group of 18th Street in our neighborhood. And it was one of the options my brother had growing up. We are Palestinian and Mexican, and he's dark skinned. He's a dark skinned brother who was highly targeted by LAPD in our neighborhood or by other 18th Street gang members. And so it was one of his options that he had, and he joined. I got to see my brother and all of his peers, fellow 18th Street youth, get targeted and wiped out pretty much from our homes and from our neighborhood. And I met and I knew many of them, related with many of them, and got to know their stories and try to support here and there however I could, as a fellow sister and fellow neighbor, and just another being caring about young people being targeted when gangs is pretty much pushed on in our neighborhood with different circumstances. So when my brother got a life sentence and I saw most of his peers get wiped out, I was putting it out there in the universe, praying, honestly, putting some good thoughts out there, that I wanted to meet the next generation of 18th Street youth, because I knew there would be another generation in that cycle in our neighborhood. And on one of those nights, one of my dreams was to meet them and propose if they were down to do a mural in our neighborhood. It would be a process from moving from participating within the gang to getting more engaged in understanding the land, the history of genocide, of slavery, and white supremacy in our neighborhoods, to try to understand how they became part of the gang, and how that what role that plays in the larger system, and just offering a cultural, artistic process, a different alternative that I had done with other young folks too. And on one of those nights that I had seen like fresh 18th Street tagging on a wall in an alley near my home, again, I had the thought, I was like, I want to meet whoever did that. I want to know who this other group of young folks, who they are, and just see what happens when we meet, I hope. And that same night, there was only one parking spot left. It was like midnight, and I saw two young folks who I profiled as potential homies. I was like, these guys at midnight, two young people, they look like little homies on the block. And I'm like, this is it, we're gonna meet. And I had a bunch of stuff to unload from some organizing event. My mom does catering, and so I had a bunch of things to unload. And as I'm opening the car, Pedro reaches out real quickly to say hello and to support. And he introduced himself as Lento. So I was like, oh, this is definitely not his birth name. This is probably his maybe gang name. And I remember cracking a joke, telling him he's pretty quick to be called Lento, which means slow in Espanol. And then, yeah, we hit it off in that moment. And I gave him I told them that the neighbor's wall that they were leaning on is a white old lady, an older lady who is prone to calling the police. So I just gave him that tip, and that started a conversation, relationship, and a mentorship around policing in his life. He appreciated that tip, and he shared with me that the police, LAPD, had raided his home the day before. And then I told him about Stop LAPD Spying Coalition in that moment. I told him about some of our work, and I asked him if he wanted to meet up to do like some basic know your rights to help out, because he was being targeted. So between March and June of 2017, we were meeting up regularly, and just some of those first meetings, I just remember his expression around like, this is what he said, this is what I always wanted. And it was just exposure to other things, to medicines like sage, to just conversations about organizing, about movement. He became super just drawn and interested. He just needed some other kind of space. I didn't pitch a mural right off the bat. That was like my own personal wishes, and I wasn't trying to impose that. But down the line, when I opened that up. He was so down, and we had identified 3 walls in our neighborhood. Pedro and his friend were also using crystal meth at the time. So it was, this was just me working with another young person in our neighborhood, trying to meet them where he was at. At the time, he also carried a gun. He didn't talk about it too much to me, but it was part of being in a gang, that is part of what it's like to be in a gang, being armed many times. So none of that scared me. This is just another young person like my brother, who are also growing up within a very patriarchal culture within the gang system and within this world. So, but he was so open to something different, some other paths. And that's funny using the word path from the earlier conversation. But anyway, he was very much targeted. He would get stopped by LAPD almost weekly. So we had to do a lot of safety planning with rides, trying to avoid any exposure to the streets, because he would get jumped by Hollenbeck police. The Hollenbeck is the division of LAPD, and it was particularly Crash, the gang unit, who are another gang in our neighborhood. So I'd love to, in this conversation about Pedro, unpack more what it means to be a gang member, and what gangs are supported, are state sanctioned gangs, like police gangs, etc. Which ones get criminalized, which ones don't. But anyway, the police gang, the LAPD Hollenbeck division, was regularly bullying him, targeting him, stopping him, and taking his money that he was working. LAPD is the biggest gang, Chela says yes. And stealing his construction work money. Even though all this was happening, he still managed to graduate from high school, which was one requirement by one judge in one of his cases that he had. Because all the times that he would get targeted by the police, sometimes they would open a case, whether it was like he had substances on him, the crystal meth, or he was carrying a gun. So in one of those cases, he was required to graduate from high school and attend college. He graduated from high school June 7th, and I took about 7 other homies, 18th Street affiliated or not. I took him to the high school graduation because I thought it was a good example that Pedro was, also not pushing so much on the education side, but it was a good alternative to just being part of a gang. Pedro had some leadership, and so it was nice to take other gang members to his high school graduation where they could celebrate each other's victories. The following morning, Pedro asked me what I thought about him going to Pasadena City College, and I affirmed him in his decision. He's like, I'm trying to go to not too far from here. Oh, thank you, baby. He was trying to get out of the neighborhood, but still stay close to home. And I affirmed him in that decision. And later that day, I get a call from his mom, letting me know that LAPD shot Pedro. And that was the first day that we saw each other, he said, I feel like walking again. He had been avoiding walking, and that's the day he wanted to walk, because he wanted to just be able to walk in our neighborhood. And that's the day that they targeted him. I just remember one of the cops' names now, Lanza. I can't remember the other cop right now. Recently, we got the body cam footage of it, and it's just some complete bullying, but with armed officers. So there began a long fight for his life. He survived because this happened in the driveway of a woman who stepped up and knew him and put her body on the line to have the cops stop shooting at him. They were able to shoot him 4 times and try to bleed him out as they usually do. They prevented the ambulance from helping him for about 30 minutes. And Pedro nonetheless survived. And there starts a really long fight for his life and for his freedom, because they arrested him and flipped the charges and said he was assaulting an officer. We got to the point of the day of trial. And on that day, the system pulled another move and cornered him into getting a guilty plea or a no contest plea, which then led to an ICE hold. Back then, that was already 2018, after a year in prison, in jail. So he had to serve prison time for this near-death assault by an officer. And when he had his release date earlier, well, mid May of 2022, just this last year, 3 days before his release date, the ICE came to Centinela State Prison and took him to Otay Mesa Detention Center. And that's where we began a campaign to prevent his deportation to El Salvador, which under the police state right now would lead to his immediate further incarceration and potential death. We won his case just recently. It was Friday, December 16th, where he had his immigration court hearing, and the judge sided with us, with so many folks who sent community letters and a lot of support. And there was some expertise in the room around what's happening in El Salvador, and the judge took all that in consideration and granted a deferral from his deportation. That was Friday, December 16th. And soon after, on December 20th, even though ICE put the right to reserve, they reserved their right to appeal, they didn't file an appeal, and he was released Tuesday, December 20th, and he's back home. And it was 5.5 years of incarceration after being shot by LAPD. So we are now in this new chapter in his life. It's weird. Weird is not the word, nor is it's hard to find the right words, but this is somebody who survived major state violence, daily targeting, was nearly killed, could have been killed, and then survived incarceration and is now just back home. And it's like we're just continuing where we left off. And there was this 5.5 year gap of just surviving incarceration mostly. And now he's just reintegrating, which is a whole process in itself. And it's good to be here to share his story. I'm pretty sure he can be here with us at another evening, so y'all could meet him and he could share his story for him, on his own now, or with us, but in his own voice. And yeah, it's a miracle that he is alive, and really grateful for all the community support on all the realms that made it possible, and all that he put in to survive. And I want to honor also, when I think about Pedro, I think about a lot of folks who did not survive state violence and whose lives were stolen and taken. And Pedro is conscious of that and has some major responsibility, mental, spiritual responsibility also he feels around how he lives now, and how he fights for other folks who are still incarcerated, other folks who are being targeted by police. And so, he's with us, and I'm happy to share part of his story. And thanks y'all for the space. Sorry if I took up too much time. I'm not sure how we're doing with time. But thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mariela. I don't know if you have time for 1 or 2 minutes, just in case anybody has any questions, or if there are any asks of people here that you can make. If not, next we have one last segment. Thank you so much, Mariela.
I could make an ask. Sorry, I
Oh,
was just giving
okay.
space for any questions. Yeah, if you're interested in supporting, Pedro is out now, so he's more accessible and available. We will be organizing some kind of larger gathering and like celebration, so we could maybe share that out with Stop LAPD members who are interested in joining, and anyone who's interested in any kind of reentry work. Just reintegrating into community after incarceration is unnatural and very challenging, because prisons are unnatural. And so if you would like to help in any way, or if you want to help with money is also really helpful to help with on various ends, whether that's for his education pursuit that he's still pursuing, that mural that we're gonna pick up again, anything like that. He has to, he's starting a whole new wardrobe. He was 18 when he went in, he's 24 now. All of those costs that come with living out here too. Feel free to drop your email if you'd like, or I can share my email on here and my phone number. We have a Venmo from one of the support team members, and we're trying to help Pedro start his own account. But right now we do have one. Cecia has been part of Stop LAPD, or has helped collaborate with us, so you might know Cecia Dominguez. I'll put her Venmo. She's the one helping us with that. I'll put it in the chat. Thank you for the space, y'all.
Thank you, Mariela. Okay, so everybody stick around for one last segment. We have on with us, I sound like a radio DJ, Tiff and Amira, who are from Stop LAPD Spying, but are guests in the War on Youth webinar, because they're coming here to talk about another program that's very, very closely related. I would say that both of these programs really fall under the theme of counterinsurgency and political repression, but they're here to talk about the Community Safety Partnership, or CSP program, which they've been doing a lot of research on. And if I could just ask, when you talk about it, Tiff and Amira, talk about the multiple ways that youth are kind of affected by this program, or are mentioned in the framework for this program, or how does this intersect with youth particularly, and then also what can we expect both from the LAPD in 2023 and in your fight against it?
Thank you for the intro, and thanks for everyone here for sharing so far. I just jumped in, but Tiff also welcoming you to jump in as well. I think counterinsurgency is the perfect segue into what Community Policing Working Group has been interested in. I know this is a larger Stop LAPD Spying sort of framework as well, but that's, I would say, the broadest, since you all were talking about local, national, or I'm sorry, local, state, national, and then international levels of the different fights for the upcoming year. I would say our broadest sort of framework is really thinking about community policing in relation to counterinsurgency and counterinsurgency frameworks. So one of our main overarching sort of things that we're working on is a community policing timeline that would help to elaborate these the way that community policing is basically a counterinsurgency sort of project. And also we could say that it is sort of 4 main things, or at least in terms of how we're thinking about it, that it's of course nothing new. So just extending that understanding of it and the legacy of it back and thinking about it in relation to colonialist forms of violence more broadly. Also that it is about the violent liberal idea of reform. So thinking about all of the various kinds of reform language and based projects that LAPD is rolling out. And then we can talk about how that relates to youth and youth programming, specifically at CSP sites as well. The way that it weaponizes care, and also how community policing is used as a PR tool. So specifically also like around asking for more money in the budget, like the way that community policing is mobilized for that, or language around it, or different kinds of like discussions around crime statistics, or in particular, this idea that community policing is through relationship building is somehow, reducing crime rates and the construction of crime and crime statistics and all of that. So that's like the broadest framework, I think I would say. And then maybe I'll pass off to Tiff for a little bit to talk more about the way that we are focusing this in particular on, as Akil said, community safety partnership sites, so CSP sites, and the way that these sort of are also have been really augmented, and the different kinds of budgetary, the ways that like more and more money is going into this sort of a project around the idea that it is about reform and it is about relationship building, and the way that the PR around it also pulls in these ideas of offering programming and services for youth in particular, for instance, like through photos of LAPD playing basketball with youth at CSP sites, and other kinds of programming. So I think I'll pause to invite Tiff to say more as well.
Yeah, thanks for that, Amira. Hi, folks. Just checking. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Yeah, this is Tiff. I use they and them pronouns. Member of Stop LAPD Spying Coalition, and have been a part of our community policing working group since I think about 2020. And I'll just talk a bit more about the program Community Safety Partnerships and what that is. So this is essentially a program, and I apologize, I have a sore throat. This is a program that was officially started in 2011, and it was formed by LAPD and the mayor's office, and also the Advancement Project, which was headed by Connie Rice at the time. And in 2011, so this was presented as this way for police to be building relationships with, vulnerable communities, the city's most underserved and vulnerable communities. And what it was really doing was, it was a continuation of the targeted policing and surveillance that had already been going on at predominantly Black and Brown housing projects in Los Angeles, and specifically the housing projects that had already been targeted for years under Chief Bratton. And Connie Rice had been coming to the police commission and kind of reporting on these sites for many years and talking about, what are we doing there? And so this was 4 sites. It was Nickerson Gardens, Jordan Downs, Imperial Courts, and those are all in the Watts community, and then also Ramona Gardens in Boyle Heights. And so these 4 housing developments had already been targeted by LAPD for many years. 4 additional policing, 4 additional surveillance and patrols. And then, so it was no coincidence, you know, in our minds that in 2011, that this was the location that LAPD decided to launch this new program called Community Safety Partnerships. And essentially what it was structurally is putting 10 cops, assigning 10 cops to each housing community, as well as additional surveillance, kind of additional policing resources, and then also adding this framework of youth programs and additional programs and resources that is supposedly supposed to be offered to the community. Like that was part of the package that was being, you know, promoted. But, you know, on inspection of like the actual budgets and actual feedback from community members, that was a very kind of very flimsy part of it. And most of the budget money goes directly to the salaries of cops. I think something like 11% goes to community programs. And if you read surveys from community members at these sites, even taken from, you know, pro-policing people like the Advancement Project, they are saying like, no, we don't have many of these programs, or like they're really speaking to like the ineffectiveness of that and the fact that those don't really exist. So essentially that was kind of that's what Community Safety Partnerships was like when it was launched in 2011, the assignment of cops to these housing developments, these housing projects, very intentionally in predominantly Black and brown neighborhoods that LAPD had already been surveilling. And then since 2011, it has expanded. So in like 2014, they did an assessment, and I think they expanded it that year. 2019, they did another assessment, and each time they do this assessment. And so today, I'll just say that they have 10, they've expanded it to 10 different sites. And if people wanted to see where those are located, I forget the name of the website, but LAPD has its own website now. Like if you were to Google CSPB, which is Community Safety, Community Safety Partnership Bureau, CSPB, LAPD, they have their own website, and you can look at more information on the sites. You can see where are these located and get more information that way. But they've expanded it to 10 different locations. And the plan is to continue expanding it. And and then in terms of like how this has been affecting youth is in a number of ways. Like it is the face of CSP is very like family focused. Like they do kind of uphold it as being a program that is for cops to be bonding with youth. And the way that they do that is again by having these youth programs on sites, and there are not very many of them, but through these programs, that is a way that cops are having those contacts with youth. They are getting access to them. We don't know to what degree, you know, information is shared. That's something we hope to learn more about in terms of like, how are those programs used to actually gain more information about youth in the community? Because we know that is, you know, that is one of the goals of policing programs such as, you know, DARE that was in schools, is to get more information about youth and also their families and to get more access to them. There's also much more surveillance on these sites. Like we have in our group, we've gotten information looking at the way that they do walkthroughs. Police will do walkthroughs of these developments and take pictures under the guise of increasing safety and making suggestions that will reduce crime. So they're actually making suggestions about how to additionally add even more controls over the environment, add even more surveillance to these sites. So things like cutting back the trees that are over, like in some cases, like play areas where the community youth would be playing, putting surveillance and cameras over park benches where community would be gathering, putting more, like a lot of it has to do with adding cameras and adding lighting. And then what we're also seeing in those documents is when community has like very legitimate ongoing requests and demands about things that they need taken care of, like the fact that there's not enough parking and they're constantly getting citations and getting cars towed. that's not being addressed. But what is being addressed is that they're adding more cameras and more lighting so that people are going to be more surveilled. And then additionally, what we're hearing from the head of the program, Amada Tingrides, is how they're also looking at, I believe she called it like essentially using requests from the community, like when they have a call for any kind of call for help, any kind of opportunity to be interacting with a family at one of these sites, that a CSP cop would do like what she called a family assessment, which we don't know more about at this time, but are interested to learn more about in terms of taking that opportunity, again, that opportunity to make contact, to learn more about the family, get some questions answered from them, and be gathering information from them, and then be making suggestions. And one of the things that she said was that a lot of the concerns that folks have brought up at these sites, the large majority have to do with quality of life issues, and a lot of them are related to poverty, and how LAPD was stepping into that gap to make suggestions. Like she said things like, oh, if LAPD is called to a home for one type of call and they may notice that there's not enough food in the fridge, then they will make suggestions as to like where are some resources for that family. So that was like one of the examples given. So what we're hearing, saying that to say what we're hearing is that they have kind of even more programs in the works in terms of like how they're looking to be surveilling families, surveilling youth, and kind of using their access and the fact that they're right on these sites to be getting even more information about families and inserting LAPD even more, when really what we're hearing is that what people are really needing is, responses to, they need a solution to poverty. They need actual resources, access to resources, instead of cops being paid, thousands of dollars to be assigned to that site. And I'll just pause there and see if there were any other specific questions that I should be answering.
Can I
Yeah, and
ask, sorry.
Sorry about that. I was just going to make a couple of quick additions to what Tiff had shared. Thank you so much for that. Tiff, I'm not sure if I missed it. When you started with 2011, talked about CSPs and the buildup. Also, just wanted to mention that in 2020, July of 2020, in the midst of uprisings, LAPD rolls out a CSP bureau. So just like expanding it even more. So, and also on the point about resources, of communities having been asking for resources for many years, and then CSP comes in and conducts what the LAPD conducts what they refer to as safety assessments. As Tiff was mentioning, that becomes a way of basically implementing environmental design sorts of tactics that are about increasing surveillance, as Tiff mentioned, and these like cutting bushes to increase sight lines, or adding lighting, but not because of community expressing a need for it, but again, for surveillance reasons. And these are referred to as force multipliers. I know that it's somebody who was speaking in the first part of, in the first hour of this webinar, had mentioned that in relation to some organizing around what was happening with crossover in the Philippines and Filipino communities and Filipinx communities. So just wanted to make that connection as well. Sorry, Akil.
Oh, I just wanted to ask two things. One is if you all could talk a little bit about grid and how grid is related to CSP. And the other one is like the COPS grants, and if we can expect, more attempts by the LAPD to get money from the COPS office to hire CSP officers in 2023.
And I'm sorry, Akil, I didn't hear your first question. Can you repeat that one?
Oh, yeah, if you could tell us a little bit about grid and how grid is related to CSP.
Okay, yeah. I can attempt to answer those, Amira, unless you have answers ready to go.
I mean, the thing I would say about grid is that's one of our main questions, I think, and a connection we wanted to make with the War on Youth group around that, because clearly there are kinds of overlaps.
Yeah, I'll add that. So grid, and I'm learning more about grid right now. So I'm if anyone here does have a better understanding of it, that would be great to hear. But it is one of the key partners, as I mentioned from the very beginning. It's so grid is gang reduction and youth development, GRYD, and this is a program that is based in the mayor's office, and it is made up of folks who used to be involved in gangs and are now working for the program as interventionists. That's one component of it. There are different components of it, and I know that there are, like, for instance, there are different components of grid, and you're right, it would be good for us to learn much more about it, because we do know that, like, one of the things that can happen at a CSP site or at an LAPD station by people just walking in and actually asking for more information is that youth can be suggested for, like, they have diversion programs, like youth diversion programs that are run by grid, supposedly to, discourage youth from joining gangs. And there is actually a survey that is completed, and I believe that this is something that can definitely be filled out at a CSP site. It can be filled out at an LAPD station, and I'm not sure what the connection to schools is, but I believe that schools can also refer youth or make a recommendation that they be referred to this diversion program. And, like, for instance, I know that one youth who was murdered by LAPD, 14-year-old Jesse Romero, he was someone who was referred to the GRID program, and I don't know more about his participation in that, but just to say that that is one aspect of what GRID does. So they don't have police within GRID, but they work, GRID and LAPD work extremely closely together, and there's a lot of overlap. GRID has their own areas, like their own zones, which I think pretty much overlap entirely with CSP sites. And yeah, so GRID is, that's a great question, Akil, because GRID is something we would like to learn more about in terms of what are the ways that they additionally are gathering information on youth, especially through things like these surveys by which they're profiling youth. And then what is that information sharing with LAPD as well. And I'll just pause on that one and see if there's any questions or if anyone here has anything to add as well about that. Okay, and then the second question I think was, as far as COPS funding, so funding from the COPS office, I don't have any information on that. I would expect that. It seems like we know that LAPD has people hired specifically to find money in the form of grants as much as possible to find all of these additional sources of funding. So I would assume that they would be working to get money from whatever source they can, but I don't know more about that specifically.
But we do know that community policing is highly fundable, just like in terms of the kinds of framings and certainly through the COPS program as well. Also just wanted to quickly share the no CSP website where you can find more of the resources that the working group different resources we've been working on collectively, including video. There's no community safety and policing, as well as a few zines.
And yeah, I'll just add too that one of the things that we're working on, a number of things in our working group. One of those is a survey that would be used as outreach at CSP sites. So we have been working on that for a while and have our list of questions in English and in Spanish. And that's something that we're looking forward to sharing with community on the different sites. And then we're also continuing to work on different op-ed materials. Like we're working on a zine right now, which talks a bit more about what is community safety partnerships and debunking some of the main myths that you hear about the program kind of said over and over by city leadership and by cops, and looking more closely at what are some of the components of this program, and also mapping like what is the ecology of that, like what are some of the connections between the different departments, like the connection to grid, the connection to the advancement project, and so trying to understand that more as well. So we definitely invite folks to join us. We have a lot to learn. We're very much in a learning stage about it, and we would love to be working with youth more as well. Youth are very impacted by this, and to be learning more about that. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Tiff and Amira. And before we just see if there's any questions, can you also just let people know how to get involved in the CSP or the community policing group?
Yes. We don't necessarily have certain days of the week that we're meeting, or different parts of the month, but you could certainly email me and I'm happy to add you to our, and stop LAPD spying
at gmail.com. Yes.
And then we can let you know when the next upcoming meeting is, loop you in. Thanks, Akil.
Cool. Any last questions for Amira and Tiff about community policing, CSP? All right. Matios, are there any announcements or anything like that before wrapping?
Yeah, well, we'll be at City Hall tomorrow. We've been consistently at City Council, but there's a special action tomorrow by the Keep LA Housed Coalition, which LA Can is a part of. It'll be at 8 a.m. on the north side of City Hall. We're just demanding tenants protections, a repeal to 4118, the regular housing stuff. And I think that's it. It's going to be a great episode of Radio Insurrection this week, hosted by guest host Pete White on KPFK. 90.7, I should know that. And it's going to be on The Other King, a Radical King. Lots of great guests. Yeah.
And when and where can people tune into that?
Yeah, it's Thursday at 8 a.m. on KPFK, which is 90.7 FM. Just go to kpfk.org and stream it there.
And sorry, what time was that?
8 a.m. Thanks for writing that out. We'll have a flyer circulating soon so folks can see it.
Hey, sorry to go back to the last segment. Could I ask a question quickly?
Yeah, we still have Amira and Tiff here.
Thanks. What are the community policing outposts or whatever they're called, like the analogs to the sheriff's department? I guess for youth specifically.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So just getting clarified, when you say what are the what are the analogs for the
Oh.
sheriff's department? Do you mean just like what are the connections to the sheriff's department?
Oh no, sorry. I mean, like, what would be like the sheriff's version of like a community like outreach program or something? Are you aware of those?
That's a great question, which I don't know the answer to. You know, I know that the sheriff has their own cadet program, but I don't know what the equivalent of that would be, but that's a really excellent question.
Yeah, I don't either, especially youth related, although I do believe, well, I can try to look it up, but I don't have it off the top of my head, but I do think there are community policing sorts of things happening with the sheriff department. And I'm sorry, that's really super vague and unhelpful.
So
Yeah,
just
and honestly, we can
Oh.
try to look it up and get back to you if you would like to leave your contact information, because I do think that is a really great question. It would be I'd be glad to take a look and see if we can find out more about that.
So this is super surface level, but I just posted something that I found on Google. There is a Community Partnerships Bureau of the LA County Sheriff's Department, and they have community policing teams that are called cops deputies, and they're they're like assigned to a specific area and tasked with addressing crime and quality of life issues in those areas, and they provide services from a community-oriented policing approach, partnering with residents to identify problems. It's like pretty much the exact same thing. And then they have sort of the equivalent of GRID is their thing called the VITA program, which is for at-risk youth and their families. It's a 16-week program, it seems similar to GRID. And then they have their own kind of PR thing too. Anyway, there's a lot of stuff on this link.
Thank you, Akil. Yeah, that sounds like good information.
Thank you all so much.
Cool, and I think that's it for today, you all. Unless, yeah, is there anything else? No?
I think that's it. Thanks so much, Tiff.
Yeah, thanks so much, folks.
Thank you.